surgeon mocked me for mopping floors, not knowing I'd saved more lives than anyone in the building. After performing cardiac surgeries for 3 days straight at a medical conference in Boston, I headed back to St. Mary's to finish my volunteer shift. I'd stuffed my dress clothes in my locker and thrown on the faded janitor's uniform because walking around in a suit while pushing a mop would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. The second I stepped into OR 7 with my mop bucket, Dr. Rivera looked up from his surgical notes and his whole body recoiled like I'd brought roadkill into his operating room. He was one of those young hotshots who wore his Harvard medical badge like a Medal of Honor and immediately started circling me like a predator who'd found wounded prey. He grabbed my arm and examined my wrinkled face and gray hair, announcing to the scrub nurse that they were letting homeless people wander in off the street now because no legitimate employee would look this pathetic. When I tried to start mopping, he kicked my bucket hard enough to splash water across my pants and shoes, then laughed about how I probably hadn't changed clothes in weeks anyway, so the dirty water was an improvement. He pulled out his phone and started recording while narrating about the degradation of medical standards, zooming in on my arthritic hands and saying anyone whose hands shook that badly shouldn't be allowed near medical equipment even to clean it. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Park, arrived, and Rivera immediately called him over to witness what he called a walking health code violation, pointing out my worn shoes with holes in them and suggesting I probably carry diseases that could infect the entire OR. Rivera mockery turned nastier as he followed me around the room. He said I probably watched medical shows and fantasized about being important, that cleaning up after real doctors was the closest someone like me would ever get to maturity. When he spotted me glancing at the surgical notes on the table, he snatched them away and held them above my head, making me reach for them while explaining to everyone that janitors who couldn't afford community college shouldn't pretend they could read medical terminology. The cruelest moment came when my wallet fell out of my pocket while I was kneeling to clean up some water he'd spilled. Rivera grabbed it before I could and rifled through it, pulling out the small memorial card I kept there with my daughter's photo from her residency graduation at this very hospital. His eyes lit up with malicious glee as he read the dates and realized she'd died just over a year ago. He waved the card around, asking if this was why I haunted the halls like some pathetic ghost, if I thought pushing a mop where my daughter used to work would bring her back. He said she was probably embarrassed by her failure father even in death, that she must have worked so hard to escape ending up like me, only to die before she could fully distance herself from the family shame. My hands started shaking for real then, and I reached for the card, but Rivera held it higher, bending it between his fingers while speculating that maybe she died from the stress of having such a disappointment for a father. He asked if I came here hoping to feel close to her, but said all I was doing was contaminating the place where real doctors like her used to work. When I finally managed to grab the card back, he shoved me hard into the wall, and my shoulder hit the corner of a supply cabinet with a crack that made my vision blur. He leaned in close and said the best thing I could do to honor my daughter's memory was to disappear, because my presence was an insult to everything she'd achieved. Just then, a patient arrived, and Rivera had to scrub in, but not before telling the circulating nurse to call security if I was still there when he finished, because he didn't want some grief-stricken janitor having a breakdown and contaminating his OR. 20 minutes into his valve repair, I could see his approach angle was dangerously wrong, and when the patient went into cardiac tamponade, Rivera froze completely, with his hands still in the chest cavity. He screamed for someone to page cardiology while backing away from the table as monitors shrieked and the patient crashed. I dropped my mop and crossed the room, my shoulder screaming from where he'd shoved me, but my hands steady as rock. Pericardiocentesis, subxiphoid approach. Now, my voice cut through his panic, and something in it made the scrub nurse hand me the needle immediately. I guided his trembling hands to the right position, and the fluid aspirated just before the point of no return. Rivera stared at me in shock as I pulled out my hospital ID showing my name and the title former chief of cardiac surgery, the man who'd literally written the textbook he'd studied from. His face went white as he realized he'd spent an hour torturing the doctor who'd pioneered the technique that just saved his patient. He tried to stammer an apology, but I was already walking back to my mop, telling him his patient would need monitoring for reaccumulation. By the next week, Rivera had resigned after being unable to enter an OR without vomiting, and everyone knew he'd tortured a grieving father who'd saved his patient's life. I still volunteer every Tuesday in Oregon 7, and now the staff leaves fresh flowers by Emily's photo in the break room.